Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قال الله تعالى في القرآن الحكيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ومن يكسب إثما فإنما يكسبه على نفسه وكان الله عليما حكيما ومن يكسب خطيئة أو إثما ثم يرمي به بريئا فقد احتمل بهتانا وإثما مبينا صدق الله العظيم. The verse which I've recited, or the verses I should say, two verses, they translate as follows. And whoever commits a sin commits it only against himself, and Allah is ever knowing, wise. And whoever commits a fault or a sin, then accuses of it someone innocent, he indeed takes upon himself the burden of a slander and a manifest sin. Chapter 4, verses 111 and 112. And I'm continuing with the broad subject of the last three khutbas. And the topic here is today is justice and its principles as taught in the Holy Quran. Now, the above two verses about someone who commits a fault or a sin himself and then accuses someone innocent of having committed that crime or sin, these two verses are also among those verses which occur in connection with the incident which I discussed in last week's khutbah. And that incident was that a Muslim stole something. And when he was suspected of the theft, he hid that stolen thing in a Jew's house, in the house of a Jew. And that Jew was entirely innocent. So when the Muslim was investigated for that crime or accused of it, he claimed that the Jew had committed the theft. The Holy Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was guided by Allah with the truth, and he convicted the Muslim, even though this alienated the whole of that Muslim's tribe from Islam. They were very new converts to Islam. Now, these verses which I've recited lay down the principle that it is the committer of the sin who bears the guilt upon himself or herself. If he accuses an innocent person of what he had himself done, he commits the further great sin of slandering an innocent person. Now, this may seem obvious, this may sound very obvious. Does it need to be said? Does it need to be given as a teaching? But it needs to be reinforced as a principle, because in every country we find cases of innocent people being found guilty of crimes through deliberate false accusation by someone else, someone who has some motive in getting that person convicted. Another principle taught in the Holy Quran is that a person who has some evidence to give must not conceal it. So as you know, you take in courts the oath that you will tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So the whole truth must be given in evidence. And the Holy Quran says, وَلَا تَكْتُمُوا الشَّهَادَةَ وَمَن يَكْتُمْهُ فَإِنَّهُ آثِمٌ قَلْبُهُ وَاللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ عَلِيمٌ. And that translates as follows: and do not conceal testimony, and whoever conceals it, his heart is surely sinful, and Allah is knower of what you do. So that's chapter 2, verse 283. And in another place in the Holy Quran, it requires that at the time of making a will, a Muslim should take what it calls two just persons as witnesses to the making of that will. And it adds there that if you have any doubt about the reliability of the witnesses, you can ask the witnesses to swear in the name of Allah as follows. And the words there are in the Holy Quran for the witnesses: we will not take for it a price. We will not take for it a price, even for a relative, nor will we hide the testimony of Allah, for then certainly we shall be sinners. Chapter 5, verse 106. So the witnesses swear that they will not give false evidence in return for a bribe, this price mentioned here, in return for a bribe, nor for the benefit of a close relative. They won't give false evidence for those reasons. And they will not hide the testimony of Allah. It's called here, their testimony here is called the testimony of Allah. To give true testimony is called the testimony of Allah because it is the testimony which is known to Allah. And it is the testimony, you can say, it is the testimony which Allah would give if he could appear as a witness. So that truth, that whole truth, is called the testimony of Allah. It is that important to give the testimony of the whole truth without concealing anything. The Holy Quran gives examples of principles of justice in the histories of some of the earlier prophets that it mentions. And this is most prominently seen in the story of Joseph, what we call Hazrat Yusuf, as given in chapter 12 of the Quran. As a young boy, Joseph was abandoned in the wilderness by his jealous brothers. They were jealous of him. There, from the wilderness, he was picked up by some people passing and taken to the neighboring country of Egypt, where he was sold as a slave to a high officer in the Egyptian government. Now, after Joseph grew up in that house in which he was serving, one day the wife of that officer attempted to seduce him, but he rejected her advances. And as they were alone in that room, he ran towards the door of the room. And the officer's wife pursued him, ran after him, and she tore his shirt from behind as she took hold of it. And just then, when they came to the door, her husband arrived. And she told him that Joseph had tried to force himself on her in a sexual way. Now, Joseph presented his side of the case, and he said, "She sought to seduce me." These are his words as quoted in the Holy Quran. She sought to seduce me. Now, here we may pause and ask, what would be the reaction of a husband and other relatives of the woman in any society, ancient or modern, Muslim or non-Muslim? They would probably attack the man, especially considering that he is actually their slave or servant, as opposed to the woman who's the lady of the house. They would attack him first and ask any questions later. But what the Holy Quran relates in this story is that a member of her own family said, if his shirt is torn in front, she speaks the truth and he is a liar. And if his shirt is torn from behind, then she is the liar and he is truthful. Chapter 2, verses 26 and 27. Now, as his shirt was seen to be torn from behind, Joseph's innocence was established. It was established, and the husband asked his wife to ask Allah's forgiveness, and he told Joseph to forget about what had happened. Now, the principle of justice we learn here is that we must decide by the evidence, even if the evidence goes against our own relations, against our own section of society, and against our own emotions and prejudices. We must go by the evidence. Now, remember that these people that we're talking about, they belong to a civilization of unbelievers, as we would call them. The Egyptians, among whom Joseph was living, were what we would call non-believers. They didn't believe in one God, as we know from the history of Egypt. And they were not followers of the religion which later on Joseph preached among them. Yet they seem to have such high regard for justice, which Muslims ought to show. And I would stress this because we see this today, that among nations whom we consider as non-believers in Islam, even non-believers in the existence of God, that they show such high regard for standards of justice, which Muslims ought to show. Now, although Joseph was exonerated at this time, after this incident, the wife of the officer who had accused Joseph conspired against Joseph again with the help of some other wayward women of her acquaintance. And he was sent to prison under a false accusation. He was actually sent to prison. While he was in prison, Joseph preached the oneness of God to his fellow prisoners and also interpreted their dreams. This is all in that chapter 12 of the Holy Quran, which I am paraphrasing. He interpreted their dreams as well, apart from preaching to them. Now, it so happened that the king of Egypt had a very puzzling dream, which none of his advisors or experts could interpret. And someone who had been in prison with Joseph was now working for the king. And so he informed them that I know of someone who can interpret dreams. And he offered to go and see Joseph and put the dream to him. So he went, and Joseph gave that man the interpretation of the king's dream after he related to him what the king had dreamt. And when this interpretation reached the king, he was very pleased to hear it because of the wisdom of the interpretation and its relevance to the situation in Egypt under the king. And so the king ordered Joseph to be brought out of prison into his presence to be honored. But Joseph refused to leave the prison unless the king first investigated the charge against him. This is the message Joseph sent to the king, that investigate first the charge against me. The king investigated it, and the women, as a result, the women who had accused Joseph, all of them admitted, we knew of no evil on his part. Now, this shows another key principle of justice, that accusations must be investigated and either dismissed or proved. Just because Joseph performed a service for the king didn't mean that he should be freed from prison. Joseph applied that principle to himself, that principle of justice. It doesn't absolve Joseph of the false charge against him for which he was sent to prison. Now, no doubt, Joseph could have jumped at this offer of getting out of prison, going straight to the royal palace to be honored by the king. Someone else would have jumped at that chance. But what Joseph wanted most of all was to be cleared by a proper investigation. And then that investigation took place and he was cleared. Now the king then appointed Joseph to a high official position as the keeper of the national treasury. I won't go into the details of why that happened, but Joseph was a capable and honest person and capable of doing the job. So the king appointed him to that position. And what the Holy Quran says about that position is, and I will quote it in translation, and thus did we give, we is Allah, thus did we give to Joseph power in the land. He had mastery in it wherever he liked, wherever he liked. Chapter 12, verse 56. So such was Joseph's position in Egypt. What then happened was that a famine and crop failure came over Egypt. And this, in fact, was what that king's dream had been about. And Joseph had interpreted it and said, such a famine will come in some years' time. So when that famine and crop failure came over Egypt and the neighboring countries, Joseph's brothers, who of course had been living for years in the neighboring country, not at all knowing what had happened to Joseph after they had abandoned him in the wilderness, they had to come to buy corn from the government of Egypt. And they came, and one of the brothers was called Benjamin. And the other 10 brothers were jealous of Benjamin, just as they had been jealous of Joseph, because they believed that Joseph and Benjamin were both favorites of their father. And they were, in a sense, his favorites because of their high moral character. Anyhow, Joseph wanted to retain Benjamin in Egypt and not return back with his brothers. And he told Benjamin privately that I am Joseph, because the brothers couldn't recognize him. Anyhow, what the Holy Quran then says is he could not take his brother under the king's law unless Allah pleased. Verse 76 of chapter 12. That Joseph wanted to retain his brother Benjamin in Egypt, but under the law of the land, he could not do so. Now, we've just heard and read in the Quran that Joseph had great power in Egypt. He had mastery all over the country, wherever he liked. But he did not abuse his power to keep his brother with him. He could easily have done so. But he abided by the law of the land. And the words, he could not keep his brother under the king's law unless Allah pleased. Unless Allah pleased, these words indicate what was happening in the story, that Allah brought about certain circumstances which enabled Benjamin to stay in Egypt with Joseph and not return with his brothers. And it is not in the scope of this khutbah to go into the details of how that happened. But the important point is that Hazrat Yusuf, applied the restrictions of justice to himself by remaining within the law. Now, another example of justice in the stories of earlier prophets is provided in a story relating to the prophet David, Hazrat Dawood. And it is, as I said, in the Holy Quran. Two men brought a dispute to him. One of them was the complainant, the one who was complaining. The complainant said that the other person was, as he says, my brother, but actually he didn't mean that he's literally his brother. It was someone in the same line of business or the same profession, working alongside him. So that's what he meant by this is my brother. And he said about him, he has 99 ewes. Ewes means female sheep. And this term is used in the Bible as well. EWES, ewes. He has 99 ewes, and I have a single ewe. Then he said, make it over to me, and he has prevailed against me in dispute. Chapter 38, verse 23. So this man had 99 sheep, and the other one had one sheep, and the one who had 99 sheep wanted that one sheep as well in his flock. And he somehow got it from that man who had just the one sheep. So that was what the complaint was about. And David gave the following judgment, and I quote from the Holy Quran. Surely he has wronged you in demanding your ewe to add to his own ewes. And surely many partners wrong one another, except those who believe and do good, and very few are there. Verse 24 of chapter 38. So David gave the judgment in favor of the man who had very little and against the man who had nearly everything. This shows that David was not overawed by the man who possessed vastly more than the other. The man with just one sheep had the same right to continue his business with independence as the man with the 99 sheep. Just as the man with a small takeaway in a street who prepares the things which he sells in his house, that man has the same right to run his business as an international chain like McDonald's or KFC. They are equal in Allah's eyes. They have the same right in human law. So this is another great principle of justice, to uphold the rights of the weak when the strong want to take their rights away. You see the strong in this example having 99 sheep, seeing that someone else has just one sheep. He's not satisfied with his 99 sheep. He wants to take that as well and to have everything and to control everything. But that is against the principle of justice in the Holy Quran, and which the Prophet David applied. And lastly, I will say that Allah himself sets before mankind the examples of doing justice by doing justice himself. And Allah says in the Holy Quran to those who would receive his punishment, Zalika bima qaddamat aydikum wa anna Allaha laysa bizallamin lil abid. That this punishment, this is for what your hands have sent before, have sent ahead. This is what you did in the former life. And Allah is not in the least unjust to his servants. And this occurs 3 times in the Holy Quran. Chapter 3, verse 182, chapter 8, verse 51, and in a slightly different form, chapter 22, verse 10. And it says here that Allah is not zalam. Annallaha laysa bi zalamin. Now, people knowing Urdu Arabic, they know what zalim is, unjust. Here the word used is zalam, which means extremely unjust. So what it says here is that Allah is not extremely unjust. Now, that doesn't mean that he is moderately or mildly unjust, because he is not extremely unjust. It doesn't mean that he is moderately or mildly or a little unjust. And it is as Maulana Muhammad Ali has interpreted it, he is not in the least unjust. And some other translators of the Holy Quran into English have given similar translations. Muhammad Asad translates this as, never does Allah do the least wrong to his creatures. And many others translate it as, Allah is never unjust to his servants. And as regards servants, who are there? The word used for servants here is abid. That's a plural, servants. Now, being a servant of Allah is of 2 kinds. Firstly, by choice, which is usually how we think of it, whereby a person chooses to serve and obey Allah and is a servant of Allah. But the second kind of servant of Allah is one who is servant of Allah without choice, because everything created, everything which exists in creation is a servant of God without choosing or without knowing it. But it is a servant because it is his creation and subject to his general laws of life and death. So in that sense, everyone is a servant of Allah. And here the word abid or servants indicates this second sense. And therefore it includes all human beings, that Allah is not in the least unjust to any human being. And the Holy Quran elsewhere says quite clearly, and I'll give this only in translation, surely Allah does not wrong anyone. Again, it does not commit any injustice against anyone, even by the weight of an atom. The word there is in the Holy Quran is zarra, the smallest particle, even by the weight of an atom. And if it is a good deed, he multiplies it and gives from himself a great reward. Chapter 4, verse 40. Now, according to this verse, the minimum which Allah does to anyone, the minimum which He does to any person, whether that person is good or bad, is justice. That is the least which He does, the minimum. But for good deeds, Allah goes beyond justice and He gives a reward over and above what you would say was the requirement of justice. In other words, the good deed deserved this much reward. That would be the requirement of justice. But that is the minimum with Allah. And therefore He gives more. So this is, from this, people should also learn to exercise justice when Allah Himself has given the greatest and highest example of it. Barakallahu lana wa lakum fil Quran al-Azim wa nafa'na wa iyyakum bil ayati wa zikril hakim innahu ta'ala jawadun karimun malikum barrufur rahim. Alhamdulillah, nahmadahu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruhu wa nu'minu bihi wa natawakkalu alayhi wa na'udzu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlilhu fala hadiya lahu. ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. And now if we say the Durood, اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. To Allah exalt and bless the Holy Prophet Muhammad and is the true followers of the Holy Prophet Muhammad in the same way that you made the promise with Abraham and his followers, his true followers, that they would become a greatly exalted and blessed nation in the world, whom other nations would look up to and honor, and the other nations would send blessings on them because of the good they do. So may Allah make the Holy Prophet Muhammad, that is true followers, may Allah place them in such a high position. Allahumma ansur man nasra deen Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa jalna minhum. Allah, send your aid and assistance to those who aid and help and assist the religion of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and make us from among such people. Allahumma khzul man khazala deen Muhammadin sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa la tajalna minhum. And Allah forsake and make unsuccessful those who forsake the religion of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who bring it into disrepute, who both either attack it or bring it into disrepute by their own behavior. May Allah forsake and leave those and make not us from among such people. Ameen. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. O Allah, grant us the good things of this world and the good things of the hereafter, and save us from the punishment of the fire of hate, jealousy, greed, and envy. And only if we use the good things of this world for the purposes of attaining good things of the hereafter, only then can we be saved from that fire. Ameen. ربنا افتح بيننا وبين قومنا بالحق وانت خير الفاتحين. Oh Allah, there's a dispute and disagreement between our people, our community, and other communities. And oh Allah, you decide with justice. You decide with justice. And you are the best of judges. And we know that at this time, many people are ill and suffering. And some of our own members have been directly affected by the COVID virus. And it is our heartfelt prayer that may Allah grant them a full and complete recovery. And may they not be harmed in any way by the effects of that virus, but may they recover soon and continue all their activities of life, both physical and spiritual. I mean, we've been informed that our very good friend and very sincere member from Manchester, Rubina Sheikh, is due for an operation of the knee on Tuesday, and she has requested prayers for her. So we say very heartfelt prayers for our dear and most valued and respected friend Rubina Sheikh of Manchester, that may her operation be entirely successful. May it go very easily for her, and may she recover from it soon, and may it be completely successful, and she is then restored to full health and her full activities. Oh Allah, let it be so. And the prayer in Arabic for all these matters of health, as you know, is Azhibil Basa Rabbin Nase. O Lord of all mankind, take away all illnesses. Azhibil Basa Rabbin Nase. Washfi Anta Shafi. Grant healing, you are the healer. Washfi Anta Shafi. After Washfi, you can add the name of a person. Washfi Anta Shafi. Heal, you are the healer. La Shafi La Anta. There is no healer except you. La Shifa illa Shifauka. There is no healing except your healing. Shifan La Yugadiru Sakama. Your healing, O Allah, is a healing which doesn't leave even one trace of sickness and illness. Ameen. Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsani wa ita'i zil qurba wa yanha 'anil fahsha'i wal munkari wal baghi ya'izukum la'allakum tadhakkarun. Ibadallah uzkurullaha yazkurkum wad'uhu yastajib lakum wa la zikrullahi akbar. So we'll now say the 2 rak'ah farz Jummah prayer.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadar Rasulullah, Hayya ala salah, Hayya ala falah, Qad qamat as-salah, Qad qamat as-salah, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah.
Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. Maliki Yawmiddin. Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka nasta'in. Ihdina as-siratal mustaqim. Siratal lazina an'amta alayhim. غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ألهاكم التكاثر حتى زرتم المقابر كلا سوف تعلمون ثم كلا سوف تعلمون كلا لتعلمون علم اليقين لترون الجحيم ثم لترون خيان اليقين ثم لتسألن يومئذ عن النعيم. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. ويل لكل همزة لمزة الذي جمع مالا وعددا يحسب أن ماله أخلدا كلا لينبذن في الحطمة وما أدراك ما الحطمة نار الله الموقدة التي تطلع على الأفئدة إنها عليهم موصدة في أمد ممددة. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده ربنا حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. التحيات أشهد أن اللهم صل على रबी जल नहीं. अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाह. अस्सलामु अलैकुम व रहमतुल्लाह. अल्लाहुम्मा अंतस सलाम व मिनकस सलाम तबारकता रब्बना व तआला या ज़ल जलाल वल इकराम. अस्तगफिरुल्लाह रब्बी मिन कुल्लि ज़ंबिन व अतूबु अलैह. रब्बि इग़फिर वरहम व अंत खैरुर राहिमीन. या हय्यो या क़य्यूम व बिरहमतिक अस्तगीस व बिरहमतिक या रब्बिल आलमीन. अल्लाहु ला इलाहा इल्ला हुवल हय्युल क़य्यूम ला ताख़ुज़ुहु सिनतुन व ला नौम लहू मा फ़िस समावाति व मा फ़िल अर्ज़ मन ज़ल्लज़ी यशफ़अु इंदहु इल्ला बिइज़्निही यअलमु मा बैना अयदीहिम व मा ख़ल्फ़हुम व ला युहीतूना बिशैइन मिन इल्मिही इल्ला बिमा शाअ वसिअ कुर्सियुहु अस्समावाति वल अर्ज़ व ला यऊदुहु हिफ़्ज़ुहुमा व हुवल अलिय्युल अज़ीम. सदक़ल्लाहुल अज़ीम. This then is the end of today's Friday service. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope that we all benefited by what was said in the khutbah. And I hope that and pray that all of us remain fine and well till we meet next. And I understand that that will be actually a Christmas day, but of course we'll be having our Juma prayer as normal as every Friday. So inshallah, we hope to meet then. And until then, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Wa alaikum assalam.